Thank you, Nitin, Alok, Shiv Sehgal, and Shiv Diwan for your insights and for taking our attendees through the contours of this very exciting offering. Viewers, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So may I remind you to please use the chat box on your screen to ask any questions you might have, and we'll be happy to answer them. In fact, we already have quite the queue of questions building up. So without further ado, let's get started. Um, I'll direct this question to Shiv Sehgal. Shiv, this is for you. The question says, currently we do not have any PSU names in the portfolio. Given that the government is planning to privatize PSUs and LIC might get listed in the near future, would we add some of these better run PSUs such as SBI or LIC to the portfolio in the future?
So that's a great question, actually. See, our thought process is that we look at stocks through different layers and quant metrics. Unfortunately, Indian PSU stocks have not historically delivered on certain metrics, and capital allocation efficiency has not been there. It's actually been a suboptimal choice. While there are some great underlying businesses, they have not passed our rigorous checks that we have run through. But with the push by the Modi government recently, and to make claims that the government has no business in being business, I think the privatization of a lot of the public sector companies will make them more efficient. And we are watching that space. And should our metrics show up that they deserve a merit in the portfolio, we will definitely, we are open for opportunities, as I said. They need to meet a certain number of criterias. At the moment, they are not.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question is for Shiv. Shiv, the question reads, we have ICICI Lombard in our portfolio and that has the maximum overweight on a stock level versus Nifty. Can you throw some light on the general insurance industry in India and any avenues through which ICICI Lombard could continue to grow in the future?
Sure. So the general insurance industry has, evolved significantly over the last decade. I think private insurers have made very strong inroads post the opening up of the sector, and largely because of the customer service that they provided, the faster claim settlement, it obviously helped these private insurers. And the other big advantage in India is the fact that it is a very underpenetrated market, especially in the non-life insurance space, and not only compared to developed markets but even other emerging markets like China, Thailand, etc. So, and demographic factors like maybe the growing middle class, a young population, just a growing awareness about these products, and the retirement planning that we are starting to see will definitely support the growth of the Indian insurance sector. And this means you will see a very extended sort of growth runway for this space. One other feature for the for the Indian insurance space is that the industry operates under a cash before cover kind of model, which ensures that we are not required to sort of assume underwriting risk until premiums are received. As a result, the float generation capability of this business is super strong. Free float is typically almost 4x the net worth. So in a 6% sort of interest rate economy, it means that with zero underwriting profits, also you can make almost a 24% sort of ROE. And I mean, that is a fantastic number, which if over long periods of time can be very, very interesting. Coming to ICICI Lombard, it is the fifth largest general insurance and largest private sector company. They have a market share of about 7%, and on gross direct premiums, and it is probably the number one player when it comes to retail distribution, tech, cost structure, any of that. So arguably it probably has the best management team as well. So while Lombard is poised to sort of consolidate its leadership position because of their operating cost advantage, their pricing edge, we believe that ICICI is a typical 20-20-20 story. And the reason I say this is because it's we believe that it can do about a 20% growth at 20% ROEs for the next 20 years. That's the kind of confidence that we have in this name, and which is why it is a part of our portfolio as well.
Okay, thanks, Shiv. This next question has come in for Shiv Sehgal for you. This says, what is your view on US Treasury yield and on gold?
So I think, let me just categorically mention that this narrative that a lot of market participants are talking, that equity markets are coming off because of the fact that US yields are, starting to creep up. Let's put things in perspective. 10-year yields are up 55 basis points year to date. and the fact that equity markets last couple of months have had a great run, right? So there can be periods of consolidation and profit taking in markets, and of course flows impact as well. But the reality is that, in my view, I think markets have absorbed this incremental rise in yields quite well so far. And also, I would like to mention to everyone the fact that we are coming off from a very, very low base in global market yields, right? The reason yields are also improving is that market participants are also extrapolating the fact that macroeconomic factors, global growth, uh, inflation is coming back to normalization. We are far from normal, but to me, the underlying undercurrent of that is quite interesting, because if you look at, yes, yields are up 55 basis points, and but there are, if you don't look at the S&Ps, everyone gets up in the morning and looks at the S&P. I look at the equal weighted index, which the ticker is RSP. The RSP is still up 8.5% for year to date in US. And what has also transpired is that market participants are not shying away from equities. They are rotating from growth to value. The growth ETF, last night I checked this, in the US was up 2.2%, and the value ETF was up almost 7.6%. So there's an underlying current which you are seeing rotation within sectors, right? It is not per se that rising yields are bad for markets. It is the question of why yields are rising. If there is hyperinflation, then yes, markets will come off sharply, but we are far from that period yet. And in terms of gold, I've said that multiple times. To me, gold is the best hedge, both in periods of deflation and inflation and hyperinflation. It will protect your value. The amount of printing that is happening from central banks and the debasement of fiat currency will play a big role in gold. Yes, I know. Last couple of months, gold has not done well. It's gone from, I talk in dollar terms because that's what I track. Gold has gone from 1950, 2000 to back to 1770 as of today. But I genuinely feel that 1730, 1750 will be the near-term bottom in gold. And I remain as bullish on gold as ever. Unfortunately, I am far more bullish on gold mining companies. And I think, as a reason, as we've just talked about, how earnings are extrapolating for India, corporate India, I have a view that gold mining companies, especially the ones listed in Australia, Canada, and US, will be cash cows for the next couple of years. Unfortunately, it's not a way to play it in India yet. We do have some gold correlated stocks, but not mining companies.
Okay, thanks, Shiv. This next one is for Shiv Diwan, and Shiv, this starts with a compliment. It says you laid down the stock selection criteria well, and most of the factors are based on past results and corporate governance, which are very important. But I could not understand how you plug in the future of company and its potential in the selection process. So, Shiv Diwan, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure. So, like I mentioned that we obviously based on, of course, we go by past track record, and that's the reason we stick with quality names. What we also do, what we also have is very detailed financial models where we do make assumptions in terms of the next few years and how we see them playing out. This is based on our interactions with company managements, with specialists, and obviously the fact that we follow them on a quarterly basis. We have a very fair handle in terms of how each of these companies is expected to sort of perform. We like the fact that if the management is allocating their capital wisely, like I mentioned before, we do believe that it will show up finally in terms of growth. If their core business is very strong, we don't believe they should go into anything else. We do look at how debt is trending, how EBITDA is growing, and based on that, if we like the sector, if macros are favorable, we think that the stock should do quite well over the next few years. And when I say few years, I do mean at least 3 to 5 years. I don't look at it from a shorter term perspective. We've been saying this, and I would like to repeat that you must hold investments for a much longer period of time to make meaningful returns.
Great. Sound advice there from Shiv Diwan. Shiv Sehgal, this next question is for you, please. On the back of the budget, which clearly favors industrials and infra as themes, would we see some allocation to some of these sectors going forward?
Yeah, I think Devan has got a very strong view on this. He's been talking to me at length on it. Devan, you want to take that?
No, I mean, we've really been debating about this for some time now. There are some very interesting industrial and infra names, in India. We've liked this space. Obviously, it went through a cyclical downturn in the last year, because of the pain that we've seen. But we do believe that this is coming back, and probably few names definitely score well on our selection parameters, and we are looking to include one of them for sure. The unfortunate part is in infra, there's not too many names that are very large cap oriented, and so they don't form a part of our core portfolio. But definitely something we'll evaluate on the growth side as well. And there's just one or two names in the large cap space which are very, very high on quality. They've been doing very well. They're making the right waves. So clearly something that we are looking at, and may find a place soon.
I'll just add to that, Sapna, that cyclical sectors are in favor not only in India but the world over at the moment, right? It is a reflation theme, and as yields pick up, these sectors will see a massive kicker into operating leverage for earnings.
Okay. So, Shiv, though you sent that one to Shiv Devan, I'm going to ask you another one now from our viewers. And this one says, with the LME metal index trading at one of its highest levels in the past 10 years, and on the back of commodities like copper, do we see another chance of another commodity super in the play, like we did in say 2000s, or do you think this is just some temporary momentum? What are your views?
So markets have a tendency of undershooting during bad times and overshooting during good times, right? That's always been the case of human psychology. Right? Nothing hurts more than seeing your neighbor get rich, right? It's the FOMO psychology that everyone in the newspapers we keep hearing, fear of missing out. But the 2000s were a golden era. If you recall, and if people recall, China GDP was growing at double digit, right? China was doing a lot of infrastructure investments. They built, overnight cities, and there are a lot of YouTube videos around it. The kind of urban cities that they created in the middle of nowhere, also kind of led to this commodity boom. And I was in Australia at that point of time, at the forefront of it. And if we are to see a super cycle of that same magnitude, I don't think we are there just yet. We would need an economy like China to be out there buying as many raw materials as they did between 1998 to 2008. But what makes me bullish, and the reason why metals are at all-time highs, is that the bust that followed 2008, when China GDP peaked and the global financial crisis happened, was that there was been a lot of underinvestment in the commodity space the world over, not only in emerging markets but also in developed markets. A lot of copper mines, gold mines, platinum mines, they all didn't see the capex investment that we could have seen as we were seeing during the boom times. So, and the fact that there has been a lot of volatility in the commodity space as well. And if people recall, just about a year back, or actually not, last May was when oil went down into negative territory in the COMEX, right? And that also cleaned out a lot of weaker shale oil players. So what has transpired is that when things undershoot to that much, you see a lot of investment being taken out away from that sector. The energy sector in today in S&P levels is about 2.3%, and at the peak it used to be almost 15%. So that makes me very bullish on gold, copper, platinum, all the commodity plays. And as we keep coming back to the fact that we are in a reflation world right now, I think this theme can play out for a while longer. We have been very bullish on the Indian metal sector as well. The stocks have been doing phenomenally well last couple of quarters or last couple of months, and I think that will continue. And I think what people are missing out is that this structural bullishness on global growth is actually being led by Asia this time around. It is actually being led by India. It is being led by Southeast Asia, with countries like Taiwan and Korea and China.
Great. Very bullish, all of us here on metals. Thank you for that, Shiv. Shiv Devan, this next one is for you, and this is on BFSI. And the question reads that currently we are at 27% BFSI versus 35% in Nifty. So would you increase the sector allocation to BFSI going forward? And if so, why?
So I think I mentioned this in my opening track that we don't pick a sectoral allocation and then decide the stock to fit that criteria. We actually pick our stocks on a bottom-up basis, seeing the merit in each of those stocks, and if the outlook is good for that stock, we pick it, right? Now, yes, there are some banking names that have done extremely well. They are extremely high quality, and if the sum total of that results in a BFSI weight being higher, then so be it. But we'll obviously keep an eye on that allocation and not let it go above 40%. But yeah, I mean, not like I would say that I will go up to 35% just because the Nifty is there. If I find something meaningful, I'll add. But other than that, at the moment, we're very comfortable with this 27, 28% weight. Obviously, if they perform, that weightage will automatically increase.
Great. Thanks for that. And shifting gears now to Reliance Industries. So the question from our viewer says, Reliance Industries has now become a very large conglomerate of retail, petrochemicals, refining, and of course, geo. Which among these segments do you see has the maximum value for investors in the future? And how much value do you see in their traditional businesses as compared to the new and emerging ones?
So one thing I must say about Reliance Industries, and there's always a lot of discussion around this, but I think Reliance has always been way ahead of its time in terms of scale, planning, business concepts, execution, right? So and this new sort of multifaceted Reliance story as it unfolds, it's not only augurs well as an opportunity for investors to buy into businesses they like, but also create value creation opportunities that I think a lot of us are not able to sort of appreciate currently. It is in fact amazing how an old economy company has turned into a sort of new age concept, right? Only earlier this week there was news of Reliance restructuring itself with the hiving of its O2C business, into a fully owned subsidiary. The demerger is important from the standpoint of unlocking value for shareholders, like the way it was done in Geo Platforms and Reliance Retail. If there's a significant stake sale in the times to come, then this could definitely lead to a strong round of monetizing of assets for Reliance. For the record, Reliance has raised almost $27 billion in stake sales from digital and retail businesses, and that has helped deleverage its balance sheet significantly. The new structure, I think, will have 4 businesses really: O2C, which is oil to chemical, digital, retail, and even clean energy. And I think all are aimed at creating more value for the shareholders. While currently the oil to chemical business contributes about 50% to Reliance's valuation, versus 25% each for probably retail and digital. We do anticipate very high growth from the new businesses. Of course, it will come with higher risks as well in terms of execution. But the traditional business remains a cash cow. I think it'll do very, very well, and their Reliance's competitiveness and barriers to entry are also very high. So all in all, we like all the businesses in Reliance and for now, and expect them to do really well over the next few years.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Shiv. This next one is for Shiv Sehgal. It's for you. This says that the market is generally at a high, of course, barring some correction that has happened today. But it says that, in the given environment, what strategy would you recommend? Fresh allocations to equity. I believe iEquity has an SIP option as well. So would you recommend weekly, fortnightly, or monthly option? And for what duration should you apply the lump sum money that I have right now?
So I think that's a great question, actually, something that most people grapple with. My advice has always been that it's not about, it's a well-quoted theme. It's not about timing the market, but time in the market. And a systematic approach to add to equities has always been a better outcome longer term. And yes, once in a while, there will be blood on the street, and when it's very blatant to you that it's time to kind of put in a lump sum. But unfortunately, at that point of time, what also transpires is that your economic circumstances or your correlation or your mental sentimentality would also be very negative, right? And you will not be able to actively make that choice, and you will always defer. It is what I've seen with most investors, right? So my advice to everyone would be, if you can, definitely put in on a systematic plan that takes out timing the market element. And to be honest, over a longer period of time, as this product is envisaged, it won't matter whether you got in at Nifty at 14,000 or Nifty at 15,000 over the long period of time. To me, this is a product that is a 7-year thought process, right? As I said, to me, a business cycle is 5 to 7 years. and if you are making an investment, you need to correlate your time horizon and your investment horizon. Like, this is Paul Tudor Jones who quoted this to me. He said the biggest fallacy that people do is that they want to make money in a week, but they will invest for a day, or they want to make money in 3 years, but they'll invest for a month. Right? Do not make that mistake of not having that correlation. Right? Make sure that your thesis in your mind, if you're investing with the view that this is the next tech for the next 5-7 years, invest in a product that you are going to be invested for 5-7 years. Don't make the mistake of seeing a market pullback of 10% in the first week that you invest, and you take your money out, because that won't give you a chance to recoup back. So that correlation is more important. And I've not met many good market timers. I have met a few, but if you can market time it, please go ahead and put in those lump sum when the opportunities arise. But my advice would be, stick to structural themes. They'll work out much longer term, and you'll be passively it will work out better in your mindset.
Right. Good advice there about time in the market versus timing the market. Good one there, Shiv. The next one is for Shiv Divan, and this is on Asian Paints. Our viewer wants to know, Asian Paints recently saw some correction after Grasim announced its foray into the paint business with an investment of 5,000 crores for 3 years. Although they may not pose a big threat to the market share in the near term, can they disrupt the market in a way that Jio did to telecom, say? Can we see a drop in margins among all big players due to this competitive intensity?
In the paints industry, no new player has touched even 10 billion in revenue after 10 years. As gaps in either product or servicing are not significant in the industry to explain. So, new distribution, innovations by new entrants have also really failed. Okay, you will actually fail to actually find another name that has actually done even close to what Asian Paints has been able to do over so many years. Obviously one strategy which a new entrant in any industry uses is the price warrior strategy, right? This has really not worked in the paints industry because consumers generally paint their house once in 5 years, 6 years. And while the paint cost is only about 40% of the total expense, 60% is the labor cost. Despite several players entering India's paint market over the past 2 decades, Asian Paints has always been able to clock double-digit growth. They have fantastic relationships with most of their distributors, and so very, very difficult for someone to come and change that. Yes, Grasim is a large player; it has some advantages, no doubt. But I think you have to understand that even if they have access to paint shops, their physical space in paint shops is limited. There's a lack of direct distribution. No brand pulling paints, can actually work for someone like a Grasim. And because for general people, it's not very easy to differentiate at a product level in terms of what they're getting. And generally, painters etc. have been very comfortable with Asian Paints over many years. So I don't believe that it's going to be a very meaningful change that Grasim is going to bring about. Yes, we will obviously keep a track of it because it's a big investment that they're making. But I would actually, in fact, use this correction in Asian Paints as an opportunity to buy. That's the way I would look at it.
Okay, all right. The next one is for Shiv Sehgal. And Shiv, you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but our viewer wants to know, there is sharp rise in yields in the US on the back of inflationary pressure, and in India on the back of excessive borrowing. Do you see equity valuations getting re-rated lower in India and globally?
So as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a rehash of the same question. I genuinely think that markets have looked at yield rise and taken it in their stream quite well so far. I don't think okay, let me rephrase that. The easy PE expansion that happened because of rates being at all-time lows has already transpired in the last 9 months. Are we going to see the same pace of acceleration in multiples? I doubt that. Does that cause a concern that they will get re-rated lower? I don't think so. Yes, I am watching the 10-year yields. If they spike above 1.75%, I think that equity markets will not like that, and you will see a pullback, a much sharper pullback. But at the moment, with yields at 1.5 in 10 years, we have about 25 bips in my mind where markets will still be pretty much on the pensive side, but I'm not worried at the moment of lower valuations because of yields. If they do spike up, if they do break above 1.75% consistently, and they stay that over a period of time, then yes, the answer to that question would be I would do well.
Okay. Thanks, Shiv. The next one, Shiv Diwan, this is for you. The attendee wants to know, has the pandemic created permanent dents in any of the sectors in India? And if so, what are, and have they on the other side also rejuvenated growth in any sectors?
So I don't think there are any permanent dents, but yes, sectors have obviously got impacted. Sectors like tourism, airlines, hotels, multiplexes have taken a hit and probably will be the last to, bounce back, but they will definitely bounce back. I don't think these are permanent issues. What the pandemic has done it has also resulted in consolidation in most industries like, maybe building materials, consumer durables, chemicals, and all the listed players in these sectors have gained market share and done really well. This, I think, is likely to continue. I would at least imagine. And another sector that has been a standout has been the IT sector. I think COVID-19, unfortunately, has been a boon for the exponential growth, of apps, platforms, online shopping, e-learning, telemedicine, all of that, right? So this has led to what we like to call as a technolution, which will sort of drive technological spends across the value chain. And I think the biggest, beneficiary will be the cloud providers because of the increased data usage. That will accelerate migration, to cloud for sure. In fact, Microsoft and a couple of the other companies have also reported very strong growth in their cloud business, even globally. So I think digital spends will definitely accelerate. There's high growth that is possible over the next few years in this, in this space. And anyways, these companies, have been generating huge amounts of cash flow. Their earnings visibility now remains strong. Valuations, though, have moved up quite a bit, still fairly attractive for the kind of growth opportunity visible. And they obviously generally have very high ESG rankings. So I think IT is definitely one sector that has got very rejuvenated.
So Sapna, I'll add to that. That's a very interesting question. See, historically, any kind of economic and market upheaval that we have seen, the disruption that happens as the pandemic has caused, and the kind of market mayhem we saw last February, March, April, there's always a reset in the economy and the markets. It is not the same sectors that have led the previous boom that necessarily come. It's actually been, there's always been a tectonic shift in how the new sectors lead the new kind of bull cycle, right? And as Devan pointed out, I think in India's case particularly, beyond the normalization, I believe it is the broader technology theme that will really reassert itself. And really, if I was a retail person to watch that, I would just bucket sectors and see how they are performing quarterly basis, and that will give you the theme of which sectors are kind of leading the new bull market, right? That will give you a very good kind of historical analogy, because if you look back in India's markets, as we talked about 2003 to 2008, there was this boom time in India, but what's really led was the infra boom, right? I remember reading the stats that if you do the analysis, the infra and the cap goods sector, almost we saw a 6x move in terms of multiples, and it went from 42,000 crores to almost like 2.6 lakhs crores. And then similar phases played out. 2009 to 2014, there was a massive FMCG boom in India. A sharp increase in rural incomes coupled with a lot of rural connectivity and low commodity prices led to the FMCG boom, and multiples expanded like crazy between 2009 to 2014. And then came from the pharma boom that kind of played out from 2010 to 2015. And then another sector that has done extremely well from 2013, and as actually coinciding with 2014 when Modi came to power, has been the chemical sector. Right now, it's the technology sector that's doing well. And there are, of course, the market leaders within different sectors as well. But the one theme that we in Edelweiss also believe is, I think this cloud computing and the technology theme is going to be a big tectonic shift.
Right. No prizes for guessing that, technology being a key theme to look forward to. Well, with that, brings us to the end of the Q&A session. Thank you so much, Shiv Sehgal and Shiv Diwan, for answering all those tough questions from our attendees. And of course, thanks to Nitin Jain and Alok Sehgal earlier for telling us more about iEquity. I'm sure, you gentlemen have everyone's curiosity piqued. For our attendees, thank you so much for spending your time with us this Friday evening and for sending in your very tough questions. We'll be happy to receive more questions you might have. Please reach out to your relationship manager to find out more about iEquity. So with that, we'll close this session for today. Thank you all once again. Have a wonderful evening and a great weekend ahead.